This was in 1987. Wheeler hadn't lost a home game in their gym in years and years and years. And of course, they won state championships, lots of them, over a period of time. And we went up there, and I had an outstanding team that year, and they were outstanding. And we beat them. We beat them 123 to 121. Sports Illustrated got in on it, and they researched it, and we set all kind of scoring records for two teams in a overtime situation. See, the two teams, I think at the end of regulation we were tied about 96-96, and then we scored another 27 points, and Wheeler scored 25 points in a 5-minute overtime. So that's 52 points in a 5-minute overtime. I had one kid named William Berry that scored 76 points, I think, that night himself. And people say, well, nobody was playing defense. You're talking about 10 of the better athletes that were in the state of Mississippi. Wheeler was ranked #1 in the state that year, and we were ranked #3. But we beat them 123 to 121. And people say, well, what was it like sitting over there as a coach? I said, all I could do was watch, because you couldn't stop them from scoring. They couldn't stop us from scoring. And it just came down to who had the ball last. And it was one of the most remarkable games I think anybody in this area has ever seen, and probably in the state, because I know we played them like 2 or 3 weeks later. And it had already been in Sports Illustrated and such. And we started getting calls there at school for people from Oklahoma and Texas to save us seats, save them some seats for the game, which was going to be played at Myrtle like 3 weeks later. Of course, you can't save seats for a game like that. And they ended up beating us that night 6 points in like a 80-something to 80-something ball game. But that was an amazing game just to sit and watch, and that's all I really could do, because obviously at Wheeler you just had people hanging from the rafters, and I was just trying to stay out of the way. And it was an amazing game, and I think most of those records will probably never be broken.
That was, you were coaching for Myrtle?
Yes.
At that time? And that was what year?
1987, 88 school year. That would have been in, I think probably in November when we played that first game. Back in that time, it was nothing for the gym to be completely packed out before the girls' game ever started, and they'd have to lock the doors. Played a lot of games like that. I played in games like that, and I coached a lot of games that were that way. It goes back to, of course, I was born in 1950, and by the late 50s is when Morris Futoran moved the furniture business to New Albany, and that totally changed what people were doing. It gave them some reasonable hours instead of working in the fields till dark. And all of a sudden, sports became highly important, for the people around here. And then it became highly competitive, because you had East Union, West Union, Myrtle, Ingomar, and New Albany people, Hickory Flat and Potts Camp, working shoulder to shoulder in these furniture plants. And then we had other plants come in a few years later. And, it's kind of like Saturday morning wrestling used to be in the 60s and 70s and 80s around here. It was a lot of talk, and then you had to try to back it up. Well, those people were having a lot of fun while they were working. If their team won on Friday or Saturday night, they got bragging rights the next week. And sometimes it would get really heated, and it filled the gyms up. And during the 60s and all the way through until fairly recent times, it was most of the games that we played in this area, the gyms, regardless of the size of the gym, it would be filled to capacity, and people were serious about it. I think Morris Futoran moved. It was called Stratford when he first moved that first plant out in Glen Linfield. And it got people into factory work. People could make in one day what they were making in 5 or 6 days working in a field. The hours were different. They were getting off at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. They had time to go home and then drive to a ball game. And then the talk that went on during the week is what would draw the crowd. They'd get each other worked up, and they'd probably bet a quarter on a game every once in a while. It just became the thing to talk about. It was Bill Cossack came in and was sports editor here. Probably started in the early 70s, and he really knew how to add fuel to the fire. He would agitate and aggravate, but he was a great writer. He knew how to sell newspapers. I know Bill Rutledge owned the paper then, and he loved it. A little controversy always creates interest, and it will draw a crowd.
What would he do? How would he do?
Well, he would just, I know I'd walk in the office at school, and the secretary and the principal and some of them would have a gazette, because everybody'd go that night and get a gazette to read what Bill Cossack had written. Of course, he was biased to New Albany because he was from New Albany. New Albany is where he got his paycheck. But he was very respectful to the rest of us. But he knew, and it would be so that I'd walk in and the school secretary would say, he's already mentioned New Albany 5 times in this article, and he's barely mentioned Myrtle. It was just anything to get them going, and that's what Bill knew how to do. Bill's one of my best friends even today. I used to, if I wasn't coaching, he did broadcasting too. In fact, we did one of the first TV broadcast here in New Albany. Coach Harvey Childers, who was my coach, and I coached under him for 2 years after I went back as assistant before I became head coach. He had moved over here to New Albany and had a lot of success. And I think this was probably in 78, 79. And New Albany had gotten cable TV, and they had that little local channel, that you could put whatever you wanted. So Bill Cossack decided, let's broadcast that on TV. So I was the color man on it. I don't know what color I painted things, but I was his color man. But Bill was worth a lot to this community in this area as far as the sports scene for probably 35 years. And he made a difference. He made it important to people.
How long did you coach?
I was head coach for 23 years. I started coaching in 1975, and I guess it was 98 when I quit. I was Coach Childers' assistant 2 years prior to that. I had played under Coach Childers from 64 through 68. Coach Childers came there in 64. High school basketball in this area, and I was small, I was young, but in 1961 they consolidated in Union County. That's when East Union and West Union became schools. Center, Jericho, and Pinedale, Macedonia, Liberty, Tipper Union, those schools were evaporated when those others consolidated. But Coach Lloyd White came to Myrtle in 1960, and he made basketball important to those people at Myrtle. He started it. He started things, and then Coach Childers came right in behind him 4 years later and did a super job for 11 years. So the foundation was there. All I did was come in and try to keep things running in a straight line, and we had a good run for a long time. Actually won state. I actually had retired my last year, I thought, in 97. Boys won state that year, and then I went back and coached another year. But basketball was very, very important here in Union County. Well, I was born here in New Albany, July the 10th, 1950, and I went to school at a little school. Actually, it was named Union. It was one of those elementary 1 through 6, unless you had too many students, and then sometimes they'd go 1 through 8. They were scattered around everywhere. Enterprise, Pooville, just every 8 or 10 miles down the road there'd be another little school. And that was because of transportation or lack of transportation. I attended Union, which was better known as Bogue Scuffle. Most people will know it as Bogue Scuffle. And I went there my first 3 years, actually 2.5 years, because my sister and I left that school in January and went to Myrtle, where my brother had already gone because they weren't having 7th and 8th graders anymore. So Mother just sent all 3 of us together to Myrtle. So that's when I started to Myrtle. I was in the 3rd grade. And, you know, I never had played in an indoor gym before. We had outdoor courts at Bogue Scuffle. A lot of those schools did. Most of them all did. And you'd actually go play them, and you might have a uniform on. Most of the time you wouldn't have anything on but a t-shirt and your jeans or whatever you came to school in that day. But it was just the way we were. It's the way we grew up. But after I got to Myrtle, I tell people, I said, I never had seen so much concrete and asphalt in my life, because we didn't have it in Bogue Scuffle. It just wasn't there. But it was fun. I played with a great bunch of boys. It's my 7th and 8th grade. We had real good junior high teams those 2 years, and then that same group of boys we played all the way through, and we actually got beat in the state finals 1 point in an overtime, and actually had a free shot at the end of regulation that would have won it, but it didn't go in, and that's just a free shot that wasn't made. But I played with a great group of guys all the way through, and I think our record that year, somebody had asked me the other day, I think it was 42-3. Back then, it was nothing to play 45 or 50 ball games if you won a lot, because you'd play in the finals and it was unlimited. State wasn't regulating the number of games you could play. I know of teams back in that era that would play 50 ball games or more. And then after I graduated from Myrtle, then I went to Northeast and played 2 years up there and really enjoyed it, and played with some super guys up there. I know one guy here from Union County that you probably ought to talk to sometime. His name's Galen Baird from West Union. He was an All-American. He was a sophomore my freshman year, and he was one of many good players I got to play with up there. And ended up at Ole Miss, and then I started teaching at New Albany my first year out. I just taught science, and then Myrtle wanted me to come over there and be an assistant, and that's what got me into coaching. When I graduated in '68, we had not integrated. The next year, integration occurred in the high schools here. I knew Miles from a distance. I probably didn't know his name, but I had seen him, and I'd heard people talk about him. And we had Coach Howard Corder. He had been an assistant at University of Kentucky, and that was my coach as a freshman at Northeast. And we were finishing up that year, and I told him, I said, Coach Corder, you need to go to New Albany. And I said, I'll see if I can't work something out to where Miles would be playing, because it was springtime. We were through playing as far as competitive ball. And I said, he's 6'5" and can play. And see, Northeast was fixing to sign their first black athlete, which I think was Miles. I'm pretty sure it was. But he went down and got a chance to see him play. He went over on a Saturday morning, and Miles played a little bit for him, and that's all he needed to see. And then Miles had a couple of good years at Northeast. Of course, I got to play with him at 1 year, the next year. But that's where that came from, and he's remains today one of my best friends.
How did you ever even see Miles play?
I had seen him, I can't remember. I think we were at the practice gym, or we might have been in the gym at New Albany, and I don't know why or how that came about, because that was not a normal meeting place. But I had gone in, and of course I was able to play, and they had some pickup games going. And I just remember standing up there and looking down. They were down there playing, and he just stood out. You know, he was just, I didn't even know who he was till I asked. And then I thought, yeah, you know, and then I kind of inquired about what his situation was as far as schooling, and I saw he had eligibility, and I said, you know, there's no reason for him to be overlooked. But, you know, that was just, and like I say, I'm pretty sure he ended up being the first black athlete at Northeast. And just a superhuman. He went on the military, and he's, to this day, he's just a fine individual.
He is. So you played at Northeast then, I guess. So you were on the team with Miles the first year that Northeast had black athletes.
Right.
And he talked about his experience, you know, that year, that first year,
Yeah.
as being different. What do you remember that being? I mean, I know it was unique for every one of you.
Well, you know, of course, by then, all the colleges that we played in back then, we would play the freshmen at Mississippi State, the freshmen at Ole Miss, freshmen at what was Memphis State then. We'd go play in the coliseums and such, and they had black athletes. Wasn't anything. But when we went on the road playing the junior college circuit, with the exception of ICC and Northwest, there wouldn't be enough people in there to cause a problem. It just, you know, a lot of times we'd play on a Saturday afternoon at Holmes or wherever it happened to be. Half the time I didn't know where we were. It didn't make any difference. I was used to playing in front of crowds. That's what got you going. That was always a letdown when we'd have to go somewhere besides some of the first schools I mentioned, because you knew it was going to be more like a practice. You know, the crowd makes a lot of difference. It really does. I don't care what sport you play.
Do you remember as a child going to basketball games before you started playing?
Yeah, my brother, of course, he was at Myrtle as a 7th and 8th grader. That was his first 2 years there. And I was in the 3rd, and I remember going and watching him play junior high ball, which that's the first time I'd ever watched a ball game indoors. And I think I was more in awe of how big that little bitty gym at Myrtle was. It was big to me then. And to see people out there playing look like in somebody's big old house, that's what I remember as a 3rd grader. And then it kind of became the norm, as it should. But yeah, I was in awe. I mean, I was coming from another world. I've had a lot of people ask me, and I've asked a lot of people, and nobody's for sure. But they made one yearbook, and it was 2 years before I started to school, and my brother and sister are in it. But it's the only yearbook that anybody knows of, and it's listed on the front as Union, but all the way through it refers to it as Buck Scuffle. But to tell you exactly where that name came from, I would imagine it's like a lot of people's nicknames. Somebody just hung it on it and it stuck, because I have no idea. It stood out there until Harmony Baptist Church, which was just around the corner, and I grew up right there within a rock's throw of it. Harmony Baptist Church took over the old school building. It was just had 4 classrooms and an auditorium in the middle. And you know, we'd have 1st and 2nd grade, you'd have one teacher. So I actually repeated the first grade, but I didn't have to. But to get out of the second, you had to sit in there with the first graders. So everybody, third and fourth was in another room, fifth and sixth. And if you had seventh and eighth, we didn't have a cafeteria that year. So you had to carry your own lunch. If we had enough students to have seventh and eighth, we were out of luck as far as the cafeteria. But if they did, if they didn't, then we had pinto beans and cornbread most every meal. But it was good. It was good. It was. I wouldn't take anything for growing up there.
I guess everybody walked to school there.
Well, people think I'm lying when I tell this, but it's in that yearbook I've got. I rode to school in what looked just like the covered wagon you see on wagon train. Our neighbor was an old guy named Mr. Wilfred Archer, and he would have a wash pot and had little benches down each side of that covered wagon and a mule, and he'd put a shovel full of coal out of his wood-burning stove, and that's what would keep us warm while we rode to school. And Mr. Pierce Messer had an old truck of some type. It had a flat bed on it, and they built it was almost like a building they built. And he took the long route. He would go 3 or 4, 5 miles away from school, 8 miles. And he'd pick up those kids, and Mr. Wilfred Archer with his mule and covered wagon would pick us up that lived close by. Most people think that's a made-up story, but I can validate it with other people. You don't even believe it, do you? That's okay. I'm used to it. All right, it was 1955. Well, I started school. Actually, I dropped out the first year because I lived close enough, and I didn't want to go. And Mother needed to get us kids in school where she could work and try to make enough money to buy something to eat. And so she sent me to school a year earlier than I probably needed to go, and I didn't want. I remember, I probably cried a little, and she said, "No, son, they'll ring a bell. You come home when they ring the bell." She didn't know they was gonna ring the bell for recess. I come home every morning about 9:30 or 10, and of course there wouldn't be anybody at home but me. And then they'd send out search parties from the school, and they'd know where I'd be, and did that for about 2 weeks, and Mother gave up. So I was a dropout before I got started.
Where did your mom work?
In the fields until she first worked at first job outside of the fields was at Roy Harrell's Sappington's Dry Good, and she was just amazed. She was just amazed that she didn't have to work as hard as she'd worked all of her life. It was work, but not compared to what she'd always done. And that's just the way we grew up.
What was her job in the fields?
She picked cotton. She'd help haul hay. She pulled corn. Just whatever a man did, she did. And she'd carry us 3 kids with her. And you get broke in at an early age to doing stuff like that. It's just what you do.
And then when she started working for the Sappington's Dry Goods, what was her job there?
Well, she just was a clerk. She just tended to customers. And by that time us kids had got, my brother and older sister were old enough to keep me out of trouble. They babysitted me, if you want to call it that. But from that point on, we pretty well raised ourselves, except when, of course, Mother was, she was a good mother, but she wasn't there, which a lot of kids go through that even today. But again, the community raised us, and we helped raise everybody else's kids, and they helped raise myself, my brother, and sister, and that was just the way it was. We were just one big old family, and a lot of them were related, but a lot of them wasn't. It didn't matter.
What do you call the community where you grew up?
It's still called Buckscuffle.
Gotcha.
Harmony. Of course, the church is there, and it's called Harmony. And getting back to the school, they eventually, they had church in that school for a few years, probably 7 or 8 years. And then they built a new church building out to the side of it, and actually used the school building. They tore it down, cleaned all the brick, and reused all the lumber, and built the parsonage, which is a nice parsonage there at Harmony Church. And it's right out in front of where I live now. You know, I've always caught a lot of slack about, you know, Elvis this, and newspaper people, when they'd write something about he's left the building, or they'd play that music, you know, what's Trilogy. They'd play that sometimes when I'd walk in a gym, and, you know, people had a lot of fun with it. And it was fine. I didn't have a problem with it. Elvis Presley was 16 years old when I was born, not famous. I was named after my grandfather on my mother's side. His name was Thurman Elvis Wisnat. Now, there's not many Elvises even now in this world, but where he came up with the Elvis name, I don't know. He had German descent, but I don't see that as a German name. But that's where it came from, but everybody just assumes I was named after Elvis Presley. But he just wasn't quite famous yet.
If they knew that you'd gone to school in a covered wagon, they definitely wouldn't think that, would they?
Most people don't buy that, and, you know, you probably should cut that out of this video. So.
Oh no, that's too good.
Well, you know, I'll have to get copies of that yearbook made so people can see it, because it actually happened.
There's a picture of it in your yearbook?
Yeah.
Wow.
It is.
You graduated from Myrtle, and then you came back to Myrtle.
Yeah, you know, they had a little ceremony over there a couple of years ago for me, and I remember, well, what they did, they put my name on the floor, and you know, I was making a little talk after it, and I remember telling them that, you know, once I started plotting out, because I try to plan things, I don't like to be surprised, and I could see that coaches, especially principals, preachers and coaches in this area, 3 to 5 years, and they were looking for another job. I remember my family and the community members around there, we'd be sitting on the porch or something, they'd get talking on Sunday afternoon, they'd say, "Did you hear about old so-and-so that preached down at Pool? They run him off." And then they'd say, "Well, they run the coach off down at Macedonia. They ran the principal off over here at Myrtle." So all the way as I was growing up, I thought, man, that's bad to be run off. And the next thing I knew, I was fixing to be one of those coaches that's probably going to get run off. And I thought, well, what I need to do is get me a job 30 or 40 miles away from here and work my way back as I get run off, because I'd really like to finish up at Myrtle. That would be my dream job, to have, you know, my last few years coaching to be at Myrtle. Well, next thing I know, I'm being offered the job at Myrtle, and I'm thinking, I don't want this for that reason, because it was reality. It was happening around me like popcorn popping. I thought, well, Lord knows where I'll end up now. I'll probably end up 300 miles from here coaching in Arkansas. But anyway, I went ahead and accepted the job, and it's the best job in the world. And I worked with the greatest people in the world. But I remember making that statement about being run off, and that was real. That was a real thing in my mind for a long time. You know, after I got 3, 4 to 5 years in, I thought, well, it's coming. I know sooner or later, you know, there'll be enough people that are not happy with things. But 23 years as head coach and 25 years there, I quit when I wanted to, and that was a dream. That was always a dream I had. I want to quit when I want to, and I didn't want to be run off. And I was lucky enough to be in the right position with the right people and the right support group, and I had a lot of good players that made me look like a decent coach a lot of times, and that's, I guess all that adds up to where they didn't run me off.
That's a huge accomplishment.
Well, but it's a lot of people. It's a lot of people involved. A lot of stars have to line up for those things to happen. And I feel blessed and lucky and fortunate. And I'd have to look on Google to get any more words that would be synonymous with that. But there's some more, but it'd be all of them. I do. I feel like a blessed individual to have had the opportunity to work where I worked.
So you retired in '98.
I did.
And what have you done since then?
Well, my brother-in-law and I started T-Shirt Alley, which was custom embroidery. It started here in New Albany, and he was already in screen printing business, and I wanted no part of that. And I really was just going to be a silent part owner in the T-Shirt Alley business. But I got into it, and all of a sudden that business just, we couldn't keep up. We bought more machines, we did this, we did that, we couldn't keep up. It just exploded and was really, really a good thing. It was a good thing for us. It like to worked us to death. I stayed in it for 10 years, and I sold out my half to him, and he's kept it going. And actually, he's just sold out here this past 6 months or so. It's still in the family, but Rick's moved on because he's like me. He's getting to the point that he don't want to work all the time. And I don't blame him. But that was my brother-in-law, Rick Murray, that he and I started that business. Let me go back. That same team that I had that beat Wheeler in that 123, 121 game, we were playing New Albany at Myrtle that same year before that Wheeler game, I think. And the same player I had, William Earl Berry, he was a little small left-handed kid that could forevermore shoot. And New Albany was good, not quite as good as they had been some of the other years because they were winning state on a fairly regular basis there for a stretch. I remember at halftime we were up like 7 or 8 points, and at 7 or 8 points it'd go any which way. So early in the third quarter, William Earl tips the ball for a steal. He's got a wide open layup, and all he's got to do is take 2 more dribbles and lay it off the board. We got 2 points. He stops at the top of the key and shoots a 3, and he shot it really high because he'd do that sometimes. And I'm up calling a timeout because we got to have a talk. You don't do that kind of stuff. Of course, I'm calling timeout. Of course, he makes the shot, but I don't care at that point. I'm not even looking at. I'm assuming he's probably missed it, but that's not how we play the game. So I remember he came over to the huddle, and I was chewing on him pretty hard, and he was bad to stutter a little bit when he got excited. And I said, "Earl, what in the world were you doing?" I said, "You had a layup." He said, well, Coach, and you'd rather have 3 as 2? I said, "I guess so, Earl." Going back out, I think he scored 72 that night. So
Wow.
he just looked at things different than I did.
He was more confident in him than you were.
He was an amazing shooter, I'll say that. He was not the best defensive player I ever coached, but he was, I don't think anybody's ever seen anything like him around here before or since. He was absolutely amazing for his size and his ability, and it didn't matter. The better the players were, because the only games he scored 50 and above was against the teams that were like state champions that year or runners up, the Pottscamp, Hickory Flat, Ingomar, East Union, West Union, New Albany, Wheeler. When we played those teams, he had to play the whole game. When we played the other teams, he probably wouldn't play but the first half. But he was a scoring machine, to say the least. The coaches I coached against back in that time, we're talking about Coach Harvey Childers and Sam Ritchie at Wheeler and Norris Ashley and those kind of people. I mean, Carl White, and it was we made people believe to a point, it was like life and death, because with some of the fans it was. And of course we had to make sure we gave the appearance that to our fans and players, and it was important to me because I wanted them to have bragging rights the next week at that plant they were working in, because it's rough when somebody rubs you the wrong way for 2 or 3 weeks before you get a chance to maybe beat them. And it was important to me to make good times for them.
Did you ever work in a factory like that?
Yep. Got out of the cotton field when I was 15. You're supposed to have been 16 at the least. But if you knew somebody, you could get a good job at the cheese plant. Most people would think it stunk down there. It did stink. But you get used to it, and when you compare it to where you came from, I liked it. I went in there making $1.25 an hour, and there was a lot of days I didn't make $1.25 in the field. And so it was, I liked it. And I was in there with a bunch of guys about my same age, and they were from East Union, West Union, and Myrtle, and Ingomar, and we had a good time making cheese.
Where was the cheese factory?
It was there on Carter Avenue, right across from what is used to be Union Wholesale Grocery.
What kind of cheese did you make there?
Hook cheese. See, if hook cheese goes bad, then they make Velveeta out of it. People don't know that. It's, people think Velveeta's good cheese. It wasn't bad. Some of us messed it up.
Well, thanks.
I can't help it, but, it's just the way it was. If you overcooked it or put too much, whatever the chemical was we put in there, and it didn't do just right, they'd say, well, we make Velveeta out of that. So there you go. Yeah, it was terrible.
Yeah.
But a lot of fun if you were on the winning side. And sooner or later you would be, but sometimes you'd have to wait a year. That's when it was tough. We played, back then there was these, Bill Cossett again would bring up, it'd be like the big game, us and Wheeler, or Ingomar and New Albany, or us and New Albany, or, those kind of games. I mean, that gym was going to be filled by 5 o'clock because, everybody in the county knew that game was coming up. And they knew it was going to be what Eric Snipes, the old broadcaster before Bill, used to refer to as barn burner. And they usually were. And when you add those fans I'm talking about, they're just borderline wanting to fight all the way through it. And very seldom ever did. But it was intense. It was intense and a lot of fun. A lot of fun. I know Coach Ashley and he coached at Ingomar, of course, most successful coach that ever coached in Mississippi as far as number of wins. And we had some barn burners. And we'd go back. His gym and my gym were identical. We had our offices back in there. And it didn't matter which one I was visiting, you'd always go to the other coach's office and you'd sit back there till it got game time. I remember it was one of those games where the gym was just packed. We couldn't even hardly get through the lobby to get to the floor. I said, Norris, we can't both walk out together. He said, why? I said, it's like Saturday morning wrestling. We got to be enemies once we walk out there. I said, if they see us walking out, then sitting back here talking and chit-chatting about everything and anything, I said, no, you go out first, and I'll wait about 3 or 4 minutes, then I'll come out. So that's the way we had to start doing it, because we didn't want the perception of us being good friends to carry over to the floor, because everybody in the stands thought we had to be mortal enemies. I mean, we had to be, because we made that appearance once the game started. We would, it's showtime. That's what it was. It was showtime. Sometimes people would get completely out of order, and I guess I might have once or twice, but most of the time if I got a technical foul call, I did it on purpose for a reason. Try to get the crowd into it, or try to get you players into it, or try to get that official to think that you're going to throw something at him if he don't do better. So it's all a game you play. That's part of the game that most people don't realize. It's a game too. It's manipulation. I don't know how much you remember about what we refer to as Saturday morning wrestling.
I
It used
do.
to come on.
Yeah.
Lance, what was his last name? They referred to him as Banana Nose or something. He was the
From
announcer.
Memphis. The
Yeah.
guy in Memphis.
And you had Jackie Fargo, and you had the King Lawler and Bill Dundee and that crowd. For 25 years, Saturday morning, I think they would come on like 9 or 10. I think it was more like 10 for an hour. I mean, Union County just about shut down because everybody was watching wrestling that 1 hour. And they mainly spent most of their time talking about what it was going to happen at the Coliseum, the Mid-South Coliseum, on Monday night. And they would fill that thing. They did it for 25 plus years up there with mostly talk. A whole lot of talk, not much action.
So that's what Bill Cossett was doing in print.
Yeah, sure. Sure, and it works.
I'd like to see one of his really good articles that got people stirred up.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's according to who reads it.
True.
You know,
Which side you're on.
if when my school secretary, which was Donna Tate at that time, when she would read it, she would pick every little detail, and she would count how many times this one had been mentioned. I mean, you know, you could have probably went to New Albany and their school secretaries be reading it the next week, and he'd mention Myrtle more times than he did New Albany, and then they'd be fussing and talking ugly about Bill. He loved it, and he sold papers, and hopefully they gave him a raise for it because he earned it. He really did a good job. I feel so fortunate to have been in this area where basketball was king most of my life. It's still important, but it's not important like it used to be. It's still important, but all of these athletes now got so many different things to do, and things get spread out, and it's, you know, that was like the only game in town. And that was going on. That's what everybody waited on. And you know, football has divided that up, and then you got tennis, and you got golf, and you got everything that's known to man. If there's a ball there, they're playing something with it. So it was the center of all for a long time. And to me, it seemed like it started around 1960 and continued until not too many years ago. And it got to where you don't have to go early to get a seat. And I hate that. I wish it was still packed houses, because that's fun. Because I know I go to a Major League Baseball game every once in a while, and if you go and there's 18,000 people in a 45,000 seat, it seems like practice. And then you go and it's packed. Every pitch is important. Every pitch is exciting. Crowds make a difference.